Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. This time, um, we're tackling something pretty different. We're diving into, excerpts from the Swiss Civil Code,
Yeah.
which is basically like the legal rule book for life in Switzerland. We've got pieces that'll touch on like personal conflicts, marriage, inheritance, even property rights. I'm thinking by looking at this kind of legal framework, we might uncover some interesting things about Swiss society itself.
It's amazing how, the legal code of a country can really act like a window into their values. It's not just what's written, but also the why behind it.
Totally. So maybe let's kick things off with something universal, something everyone can relate to: personal injury. The Swiss Civil Code basically says you've got this right to be legally protected if anyone harms you. Sounds pretty standard at first glance, you think?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
But it gets interesting when you look at how the code actually goes about defining what an unlawful injury is. It's this balancing act, really, between making sure individual rights are safeguarded, but then also factoring in public and private interests. Like, for instance, did you know that, get this, you can actually request a ban on someone approaching you? It's in there, Article 28B33.
Whoa, hold on. A ban? That seems, I don't know, a pretty strong measure. Like, it makes me think about, how important order is in Swiss society, maintaining the peace. But I'm guessing there's some pretty strict rules around that kind of ban, right? It can't just be for anyone who, annoys you a little.
Oh, for sure. It's definitely not that simple. The code, it outlines some very specific situations where a ban might be appropriate. We're talking about things like, actual violence, threats, really persistent harassment. The idea is to protect people from real harm, not just help them avoid, minor annoyances.
Right, that makes total sense. Keeps things balanced. Now, another thing in this section that I thought was super relevant, especially these days, is the whole right to reply. Like, if the media, if they publish something false about you, you can actually demand a correction. Especially in this day and age with, misinformation everywhere and online stuff, it seems like a pretty crucial protection.
Definitely, yeah. It's addressed directly in Article 28K41. Basically, it means that legally, media outlets, they have to publish your reply if what they said was damaging. And they can't even charge you for it, and it's got to reach the same kind of audience as the original statement. Shows how much they value truth and protecting people's reputations.
Yeah, like a way of legally making sure things are fair and people can actually defend themselves against, harmful information.
Yeah.
Okay, so switching gears a bit here, let's talk about something a little more, I don't know, maybe a little more personal: marriage. Now, the Swiss Civil Code, it has a whole chapter on this. I was surprised by some of the details. Like, there are rules about what happens if an engagement is broken, even down to who gets the ring back. It's pretty detailed.
It's not just, like, being picky, though. I mean, that is a bit of a Swiss stereotype, right? But really, these laws show just how seriously they take the whole commitment of marriage. Historically, being engaged, it was almost as big a deal as actually being married.
So it wasn't just about, like, I don't know, getting a ring back, breaking an engagement back then. We're talking about a huge social deal, maybe even financial trouble.
Exactly, 100%. It meant a major life decision was, like, reversed. And this whole idea of being thorough, it goes way beyond just engagements. Take, for example, the Civil Registry Office. Article 98 talks about how they're involved in the whole marriage prep thing. Basically, it shows that getting married in Switzerland, it's more than just the ceremony. It's this very formal, legal process with lots of steps.
I'm sensing a theme here. It's like they're saying, hold on, let's make sure absolutely everything is squared away before we move forward. Makes you wonder why they'd have such a, I don't know, airtight system. What do you think?
I think a big part of it is probably about protecting everyone. They want to make sure both people fully get all the legal and financial stuff that comes with marriage right up front, from day one. It's like they're trying to stop problems before they even start. Very proactive.
Right, like they're trying to anticipate every possible snag, huh? Speaking of which, they even lay out the rules for getting a marriage annulled, which is, like, different from a divorce.
That's right. Just so everyone's on the same page, an annulment, it basically means the marriage, it's like it never happened. Completely different from a divorce where, you had a valid marriage and now it's ending.
Interesting. I was reading Articles 105 and 106. They list some pretty serious reasons for an annulment. Things like being forced into it, someone lying or tricking you, even mistaken identity. That's going to be rare, right?
It is pretty uncommon, you're right. But the fact that it's even in civil code shows you how important the whole idea of free will and consent is to them. Annulment, unlike divorce, it basically says the marriage wasn't legit from the get-go.
So it's like hitting the undo button on the whole marriage, huh? Makes sense. But even a regular divorce, those can get complicated. I noticed something in Article 122. It talks about how assets get divided, especially when it comes to pension plans.
Mm.
I'm guessing that's because the Swiss pension system is a pretty big deal.
You got it.
Yes, yeah.
Switzerland's pension system is pretty well known, very well regarded. And yeah, the code makes sure both people get something from the pension, even if the marriage ends, as long as they both contributed, of course. Again, it's about fairness, long-term financial security, those Swiss hallmarks.
They really have thought of everything, haven't they? Wow. Okay, so from I do to we're done. They've got it covered. But let's move on. Talk about something everyone faces sooner or later, inheritance. I'm betting most of us have, at some point, wondered about contesting a will. What if you need to?
It's a common thought for sure. Article 469 spells it out, all the conditions for contesting a will. The big thing is you have to prove that the person who died, their free will, was somehow messed with. Like maybe someone pressured them, tricked them, or they weren't mentally all there when they made the will.
So it's not as easy as just, not liking what the will says. You'd need some serious proof to show that the will doesn't actually reflect what the person wanted.
You got it. It's about respecting what the deceased wanted, but also making sure no one's taking advantage. To successfully challenge a will, you need rock-solid evidence. High bar.
Makes sense. Now, this next part about inheritance really caught my eye. These compulsory shares for kids. Article 471 is like a rule that says a chunk of the estate automatically goes to direct heirs, even if the will says otherwise. It's different, right? I don't think that's how it works everywhere.
It's definitely different. It's like the deceased, they have some freedom to decide what happens with part of their stuff, but a big portion, that's legally reserved for the kids, no matter what. Protects the next generation, makes sure they're somewhat financially secure.
It's like their way of saying family matters, and we're going to make sure those kids are taken care of no matter what. Interesting. Putting family first, making sure there's security for the next generation. Now, since we're on the topic of property, what about those situations where multiple people own something together? Articles 647 through 649, they really dig into this co-ownership thing, which, let's be real, is a big deal for anyone thinking of owning property with someone else.
Huge. And the Swiss Civil Code is super detailed about how decisions get made when you're sharing ownership. It covers everything. Maintenance, renovations, even selling the place. It's all there, all designed to stop disagreements and make sure everyone's treated fairly.
So it's not just about, splitting the mortgage payments down the middle. There's a whole lot more to think about when you're sharing ownership.
Exactly. It's all about having those conversations up front, Agreeing on things before they become a problem. Transparency, communication. That's what makes for smooth sailing when you're sharing property.
It's like they've pre-solved all the potential arguments before they even start, huh? Pretty smart. But, when we're talking about property, there's always that, that element of surprise. Like, what happens if you find buried treasure? And get this, the Swiss Civil Code, it even has rules about found objects. Articles 720 to 723, they lay it all out. There's even a specific definition of treasure in there, Article 723.
It's true, yeah. They actually differentiate between, your everyday found objects and then stuff that's considered treasure. Usually that means things that, no one really owns anymore. And most of the time, the treasure, it goes to whoever found it, which I'm sure leads to some interesting situations, though I guess in some cases they might have to share with the landowner. Details.
So, if I'm out gardening and I dig up a chest full of old coins, I better go straight to Article 723 rating.
Probably wouldn't hurt, but hey, it's a good reminder that the law, it pops up in some pretty unexpected places, right?
No kidding. This whole dive into the Swiss Civil Code has been, kind of eye-opening. It's amazing how much these legal rules can tell you about a country's values, how they see the world.
I totally agree. I mean, we've seen how much emphasis they put on things like individual rights, fairness, taking responsibility, planning ahead, all very, very Swiss.
It's like their national character is woven right into their legal system. Fascinating. But I do wonder, do people in Switzerland actually, crack open the civil code on a regular basis? Or is it more like a guide for lawyers, something that's happening in the background while everyone else just goes about their lives?
That's a great question. I mean, I doubt they're walking around quoting article numbers every day, but the ideas behind the code, those are everywhere. It's part of how they're raised, educated. Plus, anytime someone's buying a house, getting married, those big life moments, they're going to end up talking to a lawyer, and that's where the code comes into play.
So it's less about knowing every single rule, more about absorbing the principles behind them.
Exactly. It's like the foundation for how things work, even if people aren't always consciously thinking about it.
That makes sense. Like a silent conductor.
Yeah.
you know, guiding how things run. We've covered a lot of ground. Injuries, marriage, inheritance, property. It's pretty comprehensive.
For sure. And we've barely scratched the surface. Hopefully this gives everyone a taste of just how Swiss it all is. The detail, the planning, it's pretty impressive.
It really makes you appreciate their approach, thinking ahead, trying to make things fair, keeping things running smoothly.
It's a unique system, that's for sure. Makes you wonder what other countries could learn from it, even if they don't go quite as far with all the details.
Definitely food for thought. It makes you think, how much power the law has in shaping a whole country. Not just the rules themselves, but what they say about the people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you look at the Swiss Civil Code, it's all about clarity, fairness, thinking ahead. It's like they really want things to be harmonious.
Like they've thought about all the ways people could mess things up and said, okay, here's how we avoid that.
Right. And yeah, it might seem like a lot of detail, but that's probably part of why Switzerland has this reputation for being, efficient, stable.
Makes you wonder, right? Could other places learn a thing or two from this, even if they don't go all in on codifying every single detail?
It's a fascinating model to consider, that's for sure. At the end of the day, every legal system, the goal is to have a society that, works well and is fair.
This deep dive has definitely given us a lot to chew on.
Yeah.
I mean, from defending yourself against fake news to how they handle property and inheritance, the Swiss Civil Code, it's a unique look at how a society sees the world, what they value.
Totally. It reminds you that the law, it touches everything we do. We might not always notice it, but it's there, shaping how we interact. It's not just about dramatic court cases. It's the framework for our whole lives.
I must have said it better myself. So, as we wrap up our little journey into the Swiss Civil Code, we're leaving you with a thought. If you could take just one thing from the Swiss way of doing law, just one principle, and apply it to your own life, what would it be? Their sense of fairness. The whole planning ahead thing. Maybe it's their focus on finding peaceful solutions, something to think about as you go about your day. The law, at its heart, it's about building the kind of world we want to live in. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone.